All right, so let's get this started. Welcome to Cube FM. Can you tell our audience who you are, what's your role, and where do you work?
First of all, thanks for having me on Cube FM. I'm Raghu Bhatte. I'm the field CTO and VP strategy for Zedida, based out of San Jose.
Fantastic. Now, what are three Kubernetes emerging tools that you are keeping an eye on?
It's an interesting question. Just because, and just to give you a context of why it is interesting for us, is because Zedida enables edge orchestration and management for our customers. So again, just to not going into the names of the customers, but like if we talk about the kind of customers we have, the number two automaker in the world, we enable around 70,000 dealerships for them. And we are already deployed in 15,000 of them, and going ramping up to 70,000. Or we are deployed in commercial maritime vessels that are like going across the globe, or cruise ships for that matter. I mean, like we have a lot of people understand what it is in the cruise ship. The commercial maritime is a lot worse than that in terms of connectivity and everything else, right? Or oil and gas fields, and or even retail. Okay. So now the reason why I said it is interesting is because usually when people think about Kubernetes, you're thinking about like very sophisticated, very large clusters doing a lot of sophisticated things, and like everything from your inventory to AI and everything in between, right? That is what like the clusters are supposed to be doing, and that is what Kubernetes is created for. But what we have seen on the edge is a little shift. I don't want to say a little, it is a major shift in the paradigm. What we see is that there is a need for people to deploy containers and operate them and orchestrate them. If you are going to deploy one or two containers, then people just deploy one or two containers natively using Zedida or like other technologies like Docker or something like that. But once the number of containers increase to 10 plus, then they start thinking, okay, this is not working. I need to go to Kubernetes because Kubernetes is proven. It is working perfectly well for me in the cloud and in the data centers. And then they start doing Kubernetes at the edge. But all of a sudden, they find out that, like, hey, this is not the same Kubernetes that I run in the cloud. Because now, instead of running a very, very large cluster, I'm running literally 15,000 clusters that are dispersed across the globe. Some might have connectivity, some might not have connectivity. I need to set the policies of the security policies, the admission policies, but not just in terms of the Kubernetes, but also on the assets that are hosting your Kubernetes. Everything from hardware all the way up to your applications, right? Now, that is my world. That is where I live in. And like when my customers come in and say, hey, at 15,000, do you think it is you are going to scale to 70,000 easily? Or do you think like you will be able to scale to a few thousand, but these are on ships that are roaming across in the middle of nowhere? Then I need to solve that problem. And that's the reason I started by saying like it's an interesting problem, because what we are dealing with is a different other side of the Kubernetes, where like we developed a whole bunch of tooling to make sure that Kubernetes works properly. But now we are looking at a different variations of the tooling, or completely new set of tools to make this work in this environment that I just talked to you about. And this is edge at the end of the day, right? Everything from edge AI all the way to the basic applications running at the edge, but in remote areas. Okay, so that's the reason like it's hard for me to say what three tools that I'm looking for. But the kind of things that I'm really interested in are things that would be able to orchestrate this fleet of Kubernetes clusters, and be able to like provide a lot of handles for me to enable different policies that are set. And the third one is just in terms of the visibility and monitoring, right? So those are the things we are investing. We, as in Zedida, is investing in some of those things, and like we have a roadmap for all of them. But if there are tools that are out there that can actually do this, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. That's the last thing we want to do. So I would be very, very interested in knowing those things and then bringing them back into our product.
One of our guests, Dan Garfield, shared that your cluster only feels real once you set up ingress and DNS. Before that, it was just a playground where it didn't matter when stuff broke. What are your thoughts on this?
100%. I can't agree more with him, right? And again, going back to the cattle versus pets, when you have your pet, you name the pet, you feed the, I mean, like I like dogs a lot. Okay, so I'm very sure like what I feed the my dog, or like what are the kind of things that kind of exercises I give, all of these kind of things, right? You are very specific about that. And usually when I look at very large clusters, I think of them as pets. Okay, there are people who are assigned to take care of these things. Okay, now in the environment that Zedida operates, and like where we operate, we cannot actually afford to think of our assets as pets, because when you have 20,000 of them, if you have two pets, or if you have two cats, oh, you have two cats. If you have 10 of them in your house, you're a cat lady, right? So like we don't want to be that. Okay, so the reason why it is because when you have a large number of assets, you should be able to like separate them into fleets or sub fleets, and be able to set policy, and be able to like see when things don't work, get the alerts, and then be able to like react to that. And again, when you have something that is working in your lab, okay, you have full access to it, everything is good, right? Now you put it out in the field, in one location, and your DNS doesn't work, or like you have to now do a whole bunch of other things to make sure that this can live in the wild. That is where you go from the pets to the cattle, because now whatever you did for that one instance, now you should be able to like repeat it for a large fleet of assets. And when you are able to do that without actually personalizing every single instance, that is where you would be able to scale both operationally but also economically, right? So I completely agree with the comment that like cattle versus pets. And also if you start treating everything as pets, then like you won't be able to scale. And once you start treating something as a cattle, that is where you start feeling, hey, these are the things I need to do, oh, both from a technology perspective, both from an operational perspective, a security posture perspective, that when you do these things, that is when you can scale. And only when you can scale in an economical fashion can we actually enable edge. Otherwise it's just not going to happen.
In terms of automation and resource management, one of our other guests, Alexander, expressed that having an automated mechanism is better than enforcing processes. What automation tools or approaches do you recommend for managing Kubernetes resources?
That's again like a very good insight, right? So one of the things that we have seen, and again here, like I'm going to just take a step back, and like Zedida works on all edge assets, Kubernetes being one of them. But we have very large fleets where it is not Kubernetes, but like your regular virtual machines running alongside some containers, right? So we have all different flavors that we have to manage. Now, the one thing that we have to understand is that when you are running in a data center, or when you are running in the cloud, you have a workforce that is behind managing these assets. If you have like your IT team managing these assets, then you know that like they are going to be having a regular, I mean, a simple thing as like having a calendar which says that, oh, on this time like go check something, right? Or having a trigger, having an alert, having something which is a periodic thing, versus you trying to figure out that you have 100 different locations. I'll give you an example. So we have we have a deployment where the third largest maritime company in the world, okay, so they have containers which are air cooled containers. Okay, so now if that device, or if the container is not working properly, then like all the food that is perishables inside all gets spoiled and it gets thrown away, right? So now that is a waste of perishables, but more importantly a big economic downturn for these people who are like actually handling it. So they have solutions where they are running a Kubernetes cluster on the ship. Actually they are running a few of them, not just one, because they need something for inventory, they need something for sensors, they need something that just takes care of all the connectivity to the ship, everything else, right? But what happens is that like when there is a change that needs to happen, when there is a maintenance that needs to happen, Now you are at the mercy of the IT staff that is inside on that ship. Now, when you are at the mercy of the IT staff inside on that ship, you really cannot expect a maritime shipping vessel to have an IT staff that fully understands Kubernetes. I mean, I hope that, I wish that would be the case, but that is not the case, right? So, what is going to happen is that, like, now you are only as good as what your boots on the ground are good at. So now I can put hundreds of policies, both in terms of security, both in terms of capacity management, both in terms of application distribution, all of these kind of things. But when I put those policies and the processes in place, I am still depending on another entity to take care of that. So what we believe at Zedida is to, like, automate as much as possible. Okay, take the need for the processes, take the need for the security posture out. And the reason is that, like, when you are, again, going back to the cattle versus pets, right? When you're dealing with a large number of assets, what you want is that you want the uniformity across all of these the things. When, and the only way you can get uniformity across all of these things is, like, you need to have automation that takes care of day minus one, where, like, you are planning everything. You need to have automation that takes care of bring up of your Kubernetes clusters and the assets that are hosting the Kubernetes clusters. But also you need to have automation that is continuously looking at what is happening on those clusters, both the health of the runtime itself, the hardware itself, but also inside, what is happening with my pods, what is happening with the applications that is happening. And then report back. And then there should be a loop feedback saying that, okay, there are, out of this 100 cattle, there are 3 cattle that are, like, the 3 cows that are not really, like, vaccinated to the right thing. Right now you isolate that, and you can actually have more tooling to, like, fix that problem. Or for those 3, then you can get, look, your experts to look at it. So automation is a must. And I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to understand that, like, okay, if you are going to have like 15,000 Kubernetes clusters, okay, if you don't automate, you're just going to go crazy or kill yourself, right? Like, this is you cannot solve that problem with 100 IT engineers. That is not just possible. And especially if they are spread across the globe, okay, where, like, language problems, all of these things come into picture. We have dealt with it firsthand, and we have put a lot of automation around our product to make sure that, like, the manageability of everything, like, for example, in this case, like, the runtime, okay, is it patched properly, or, like, your helm is, like, the same thing, is it personalized properly, are your policies correct? All of those things are the things that, like, we take care of, so that our customers at the end of the day can concentrate on the actual outcomes that they are interested in. So for example, in the same sense that, like, my are the folks on those ships, they are concerned about, okay, what is the state, how much was the temperature variation while the ship, while this content was going from Pacific across Atlantic, let's say. So, and they are, like, very concerned that if it fluctuates more than 10 degrees, then there might be, if it is meat, then the meat might get spoiled, right? Or there is a other thing where, like, there is crew health. So the crew that are on the ships have to call home. So one of the things that they do is they just give them a prepaid cards, just like what we used to do a long time back before the cell phones became all of these things, where you'd buy a prepaid card and use the minutes on that, right? That's what they do. And they need to know, like, they should be concentrating on that, and everything else underneath that should be taken care by automation, very transparently, or as transparent as it can be.
When looking at observability and monitoring, one of our guests, Miguel, explained that while monitoring deals with problems that we can anticipate, for example, running out of, a disk running out of space, observability goes beyond that and addresses questions you didn't even know you needed to ask. Does this statement match your experience in adopting observability in your stack?
Yes, 100%, right? Like, and again, I think this is the story of the past 5 years. I literally have to, and it has nothing to do with what we are doing too, by the way. So what is happening is, just giving you a context, is, like, there is a lot of monitoring that was happening. Okay, there is a lot of monitoring. We all know how to monitor logs. We all know how to like actually parse them and like figure out what is inside that and like gain insights based on what is happening, right? So now what has changed is that like not only are we monitoring, but now we are starting to correlate. And this is where the new AI is helping quite a bit. And by the way, like every interview I have to say AI at least thrice. I think I did that right now. Okay. But the thing is like it has to it I mean, the AI is really helping because now you can start correlating not just of like what is happening on one site. And it is very much applicable to us when we are dealing with 15-20,000 sites or 15-20,000 clusters spread across, right? So monitoring is one thing in terms of, hey, is the health of is it running, first of all, which is a very, I mean, it might seem like a very simple thing, but like when you're dealing with edge, that in itself is a very valuable thing to know. Okay. But on top of that, like knowing how hot it is running, or like are your applications running properly, are your applications fully overloaded, is the monitoring portion of it. But then what I can do is like not only can I get that information, but I can get information both about the assets on which it is running, whether it is a hardware or other stacks, and also about the network traffic that is going out, or like other things associated with that particular outcome. When I'm able to gather all of that and then make sense of it and learn more insights out of it, and not because I have access to that, but like because this is centrally we have access to such large number of endpoints, we can actually make a real good correlation in terms of, hey, I know that when something like this is happening, or when somebody is moving from X to Y, or like there is this particular region, the dealerships got are not performing as good as like they should have, just because like, okay, there is also an outage in let's say like there is a DNS outage somewhere in that region, right? So we can sense all of that, and then based on that, like we can actually come up um, with actionable things that the operators can then go and like fix it before it happens. And this is again like the reason why I said it is the story of the past 5 years is because we started with preemptive maintenance. We also started with understanding when things are going to fail and like try to take actions about it. But now we are getting into the phase where it is not about that, but it is about like understanding the stack, the full stack, from silicon all the way to your applications, and actually the policies and process about that too, and then figuring out where is the thing that is causing something to go in one way. Sometimes it is not everything is bad, right? Like sometimes it's also the positive things. Some sites are working really really well. How can we replicate that into other places? Okay, what are the other areas? So monitoring versus observability makes a lot of sense. And again, like I do have want to talk in terms of like what I see on a daily basis and the life I live, which is on the edge. That's a cool thing to say, by the way. The idea is that like when you have the luxury of having a large data set, that is where like you can do learning, you can inference. That is like the value of the inference and the accuracy of the inference increases dramatically. And that's the reason like I think like observability and monitoring are very very important, and we are going from monitoring into the observability phase. It's monitoring is not going to go anywhere, right? Like it is going to stay. It is the base core foundation of all of these things. But we are getting a lot more value out of the same bits that we used to see before.
I know you've given some context about, what we've been doing for the past 5 years. Thinking about the fact that Kubernetes turned 10 years old this year, what can we expect in the next decade of Kubernetes? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't want to prophesize and say like this is what is going to happen. I have a pretty good idea of where the trend is, and also I have a really clear wish of what it would be. Okay, so the trend is that like I see that Kubernetes is going to become more and more sophisticated. Okay, both in the data center, both in the cloud, and on the edge. And right now I am talking in terms of there are three distinct distinct areas, right? Like running Kubernetes on the edge is different than running Kubernetes on the cloud, but that's going to collapse. 100% it is going to collapse. And like it is going to be a very smooth transition from one to another, because at the end of the day, you're doing all of these things because you want to analyze something at the edge. You want to provide an outcome, whether it is as simple as like when a car goes in front of a mechanical arm in your garage, the mechanical arm goes up when you badge in, right? There's a lot of processing that is happening, everything from number plate reading to like scanning your badge to identifying whether it is the right thing, and then somebody and some other thing like telling the mechanical arm to go up, right? So all of those things are happening, but at the end of the day, the data that is being collected and everything is being sent back to the cloud. Okay, so I do not think like Kubernetes is going to run in the edge in a vacuum. It is going to connect back to the cloud, and as more and more people start using it, which is already happening, it is going to get very, very sophisticated in terms of it becomes very seamless. That's one thing that is going to happen, but I also think it's going to completely disappear, even though it is there, right? So the way I would like to think about it is like you have your microprocessors. I'm using a laptop to talk to you. Okay. Now, when I talk about a laptop, I talk about hey, do you have an Apple? You have a Dell? Is it based out of Intel? Is it based out of ARM? Right. But very, very few people talk in terms of is it based out of an Intel or is it based out of an ARM? They just expect a processing unit to be there, and that does its work. And like you are more interested in the color of the laptop or like what is the resolution of your camera and things like that, right? I think Kubernetes will become that. Okay, it will become the integral part of uh, all the compute that is happening both in the cloud and at the edge. But because of its sophistication and because of the way it is going to evolve, it's going to become almost transparent, and that is what we want to do. Because like at Zarida, like we really care about like enabling the edge, and enabling the edge means enabling the outcomes at the edge. No one wakes up and says, tells them or thinks about, I'm going to enable Kubernetes at the edge today, right? Yes, no one, I mean, I wish people do that. I do that once in a while, but that's not the reality. People wake up and say, I'm going to create value at the edge by running these applications, bringing these outcomes and things like that. And Kubernetes is the way they are going to actually do that. Just like how the silicon became like completely transparent to people, they don't think about silicon. They don't, I mean, except for Nvidia nowadays, just because of all the great things Nvidia is doing. But like the regular things, like you don't think about it, right? Now, Kubernetes is going to become like that. I do see that trend happening. I wish it becomes like that, like sooner. Hopefully not 10 years, because like there is so many cool things that are happening at the edge in terms of the applications, and most of them are today bottlenecked by risk mitigation, where people are not really comfortable putting a Kubernetes stack or any other. It need not be Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is by far the most common one. A stack at the edge to like manage the outcomes and trust it that it does it on day in and day out. Because God forbid, if that mechanical arm in your garage doesn't open, you're not going to your dinner or you're not getting out of your office, right? So those are the kind of things that are, I mean, you go from a virtual value generation to a real thing that people can touch and feel. And when those things stop working, there is a very big effect to it, right? So these are the kind of things that like people are thinking about. But as Kubernetes evolves a lot more, both from a cloud side but also from the edge side, now that becomes transparent. People will start thinking a lot more about the applications because now they trust that, right? Just like they trusted, we all currently trust the cloud to do its thing. When you launch a Kubernetes, you're only worried about, hey, if I have to upgrade, do I have to pay AWS more, or like is AWS going to force me to upgrade because like it doesn't want to support the older versions and all of those kind of things. But we are not really thinking about will it work or not, right? It's taken for granted. So that's the same thing that is going to happen at the cloud, on the edge, sorry. And then that will evolve, that will lead to like a lot more applications and more sophisticated applications being brought down to the edge.
Now, getting towards the end, what's next for you and how can people get in touch with you?
So we have actually announced ZKS, Zadida's Kubernetes service in last KubeCon. We have done a lot of work since then. We have actually acquired multiple different customers, and like this is not slideware for us. This is real for us, right? We are talking about 15,000 Kubernetes clusters in dealerships. We are talking about tens of thousands of Kubernetes clusters, and believe it or not, in farms, there are actual robots that help in milking the cows. And we have a customer that has 20,000 of these farms, and they run a Kubernetes cluster inside every single one of these farms. And they want to manage all of this. Okay, so we have a running joke that like, hey, we are in shipping, we are in the full supply chain of meat, right from meat and dairy, I should say, right from the cows all the way to retail stores, right? So we are doing all of this, but we are just getting started. What we really want to do is get into that state where our customers, when they want to enable these outcomes at the edge, they look at Kubernetes as just another platform. They would be able to like deploy Kubernetes directly using Zadida. When I say deploy Kubernetes, both the runtime and also like the applications, the full orchestration stack, and they are worried about their applications and the performance of their applications. That is one side. We are also investing heavily into AI at the edge. Not just in terms of Kubernetes, but outside of the Kubernetes too. But it is very hard to imagine AI at the edge running without Kubernetes at the edge. I mean, like there are one or two very few, I shouldn't say one or two, but like few instances where it is running natively, but they're very specialized. Anything that is more generic has to run on top of Kubernetes. So we are also enabling quite a bit of that. So we will be busy for the next 1 or 2 years or more. And what we want to do is get to that state where our customers think of Kubernetes at the edge as something that is really like common. First thing, they trust it. And the other side of it is like they do not think of the risk when they think about this. Hey, am I going to lose my job because I just installed Kubernetes on 10,000 sites and it doesn't work, right? So that is where we are. In all of this, we are also looking at security very, very closely, both in terms of security of the application, security of your runtime, security of the hardware, but also network security and everything else. We are partnering with multiple different players in this area so that like we can bring that holistic security to all these edge. We already do that, but like when we start thinking about AI and when we start thinking about the full Kubernetes stack, it is a different level you have to get to. So we don't have, I mean, there are already really good security solutions out there. So like I said at the beginning of this interview, we don't like to reinvent the wheel if it is already available. So we are partnering with them to bring them into the product and providing our customers a very easy and a simple way of enabling their edge applications and edge solutions using Kubernetes at the edge.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The best way is to like reach out to anyone at Zadida. I am raghu@zadida.com. You can just email me. You can get on to zadida.com, zedda.com, and like click on reaching us, contact us. And if you are interested in a demo, you can just get onto the zadida.com and like ask for a demo.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.